Hey, this is Tony here with Salt Strong, and in this video I want to talk about using a landing net versus using fish grips. Now these are both great ways to land fish, however they have their pros and cons as far as conservation goes, especially if you're a catch and release angler. When using a net or fish grips, there are some things you want to look for that will help protect those fish as you are catching them and landing them. So let's go ahead and take a look at some pros and cons of using a landing net versus using fish grips. So right off the bat, using a landing net is going to be the more effective way to land a fish. You are more likely to successfully land a fish with a net because all you have to do is scoop the fish up out of the water. If you're using fish grips, you have to wait for that fish to get really tired so that you can get a good shot at putting the fish grips in the fish's mouth and landing them. So that is one little advantage of the net over the fish grips when it comes to landing a fish. Now, if you are landing your fish with a net, I highly recommend getting a net that has either a rubber-coated mesh or a mesh that is just all rubber. That will tremendously help out the fish when you do release it because it doesn't remove the slime coat of the fish. So you can unhook the fish inside the net and then just dump them back in the water without even having to touch them, and it won't risk damaging that slime coat. Now, another thing with the net, as far as a recommendation, try to get a net that either has a foam around it or you can attach a pool noodle to your net. That way, if you happen to drop it into the water, it doesn't sink down to the bottom and then you have trash sitting down at the bottom of wherever you're fishing. So definitely have some kind of foam on your net that keeps it from sinking in case you do drop it overboard. Now, as far as the fish grips go, this is a great way to land bigger fish, especially if they don't fit in your net. You might risk the fish falling out of your net and then completely losing that fish. So this is where the fish grips come into play. Now, these are really good because you're not affecting the slime coat of the fish. You don't have anything rubbing against the body of the fish. So fish grips, really good because all you have to do is clamp them onto the mouth and you're good to go and you can pull that fish in. Now, when you do pull a fish in with fish grips, I do not recommend holding the fish from their head and just letting them dangle as you see in a lot of pictures. That's not the proper way to hold a fish. When you grab a fish with the fish grips, put the fish grips in the fish's mouth, lock it down, and then support the belly and then lift the fish out of the water that way. It just makes it a lot easier for you to pick the fish up, and also it's a lot easier on the fish. Now, these fish grips that I have here, these are the original fish grip. They are plastic. They float, which is definitely a plus because if you happen to drop them overboard, you don't have to worry about them sinking down to the bottom. But you do have to make sure you don't lose a fish when you have these stuck to the fish. So really make sure you have control of your fish. You don't want to put these in the fish's mouth, pose for a picture, next thing you know the fish flops out of your hands into the water. So now you have a fish swimming around with fish grips in his mouth. He's not going to like that and it's not good for him. So definitely make sure you have control of the fish when using the fish grips. Now, the reason I prefer these fish grips over some other ones that are out there, these plastic ones have a wider lip on them. If you look at some of the metal ones that have that very narrow lip, what it can do is bore a really big hole in the fish's mouth as it's moving around, and it really pokes through their mouth. And that can be a bad thing, especially if the fish goes to eat something, it has something in its mouth, it can escape through that hole in its mouth. So you want to make sure you get fish grips that do not damage the fish's mouth a lot. Now, one thing that can be really troublesome with these fish grips is that they're a little cumbersome to use. As you can see, it's very hard to use them with one hand, so I highly recommend putting that loop around your wrist when you go to grab the fish, and then just have your hand like so. Have your middle finger right behind that front lever, then your pointer finger in the front, so that you can open it with your middle finger, close it with that pointer finger, or both, or you can grab the whole thing with your hand and pinch it closed. And then if you need to open it, just pop it open like so. Now, the ones that have the metal lip are pretty easy to use. A lot easier to use. It's just one hand operation. You just pull the lever and it closes and opens it. So that's one thing that can be a little troublesome with these types of fish grips, but these are the ones I highly recommend if you are trying to land a fish. Now, lastly, as far as space is concerned, if you're fishing from a small vessel, such as a kayak or paddleboard or a small john boat, or if you're wade fishing, the fish grips are the way to go. They're very light. You can put them in your pocket. You can hang them from your belt. You don't have to worry about them getting wet, and they can work really well. Now, if you are fishing from a boat, the net would probably be the best way to go because you can have a long extension handle on there, especially if you have very high sides on your boat. It would be very hard to reach over your sides and down into the water to grab the fish with the fish grips. So that is where I would use a net. So hopefully this video will help you out when choosing whether or not to use a landing net or fish grips. Again, conservation is key when it comes to using these two items because you really don't want to damage the fish, especially if you are a catch and release angler. So that will wrap up this video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. Also, if you're interested in catching more fish in less time, guaranteed, definitely check out our Salt Strong Fishing Club at saltstrongclub.com. Until then, I'll see you on the next video.